What happens when you're from an automobile family and your real dream is to be a writer, a journalist, and a writer of books? Join me as I interview John Grogan next. Hello everybody and welcome back to Uncommon Sense and welcome to this gorgeous June day. Aren't we lucky? With me today is John Grogan, and someone we are going to have so much fun with. He is the author of Marley and Me, and he is a columnist. He's a Michiganian, I don't know, something like that. He was born in Detroit. He went to Central Michigan University, from which he graduated with a degree in English and journalism and worked on the paper. And he told me he was just here 3 weeks ago to be a commencement speaker. Following his graduation, he was a police reporter in St. Joseph. He went back to Ohio State for his master's degree in journalism, worked in various places, but he also had 2 fellowships, one with the Fulbright? Pulitzer.
No, the Poynter Institute for Media Studies.
Yes, that's the second one.
And the Kiplinger Foundation.
I couldn't remember that. Excuse me. The Kiplinger Institute for Media Studies on public policy. That we are coming back to. And then the Poynter, as he imagined, we are also coming back to that because that is a think tank. He worked in the South Florida Sun-Sentinel in various positions, finally as a metropolitan columnist, at which point he introduced this famous, wonderful dog, Marley, who transformed his life and probably his finances.
Somewhat.
And he is here in Midland to speak at our wonderful Matrix Midland Festival. So, John, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Good to be
you.
here.
I'm happy you are. Tell me, I'm a New Yorker. What was it like being born and raised in Detroit?
I'm a 3rd or 4th generation Detroiter. My relatives came from Ireland in the 1840s, and they went right outside Pontiac, Michigan, and I grew up 10 minutes from that original homestead. And as you can imagine, it was an automotive family. My grandfather was one of the first early pioneers in automotive, before there was a General Motors, and worked for the Rapid Motors Company, which was its predecessor. And then my father spent his whole career at General Motors and went to General Motors Institute in Flint and then made his whole career with GM. So my entire youth was steeped in the big 3 in Motor City, and that was a great period growing up. It was like at the height of America's prowess and confidence in their abilities to make the highest quality vehicles in the world. And I was just growing up in the middle of it. My father had, part of his job is he brought home a company car. Every 2 weeks they'd switch out a new car, and he would drive the new models. So we were always, he was bringing home all these wonderful brand new designs. Some of them were prototypes that hadn't been released yet.
My favorite. And
so as like a 12-year-old boy, I'm driving around with my dad around town in these new prototype automobiles. It was a great childhood.
The General Motors Institute, is that kind of like an engineering school, is it? Is that what he did?
Yes, it was General Motors financed and ran it, as I understand it, and you would go to school a semester and then you would work for the company for a semester, and so you'd work your way through school, but you were also gaining applied experience as you went. And he spent his whole career as an engineer then, from that point forward.
Did you have that kind of mind yourself?
No, actually, I think one of my father's big disappointments in life was he had 4 children, and none of us has any aptitude for mathematics or engineering or hard sciences. We all gravitated towards the humanities. And all of us, to a certain extent, my three siblings, we all write in different capacities. And my father was very proud of that, actually, but I think it was a curiosity to him that none of his kids we could barely balance a checkbook, let alone get through advanced calculus.
Did you stumble into journalism?
I wouldn't say I stumbled. I discovered a love for language pretty young in life. It was probably in about 5th or 6th grade. I went to a Catholic school and got in my share of trouble. And one of the things I had to do was write these repentant essays. The nuns would give us to sit and write what you did wrong. And I started having fun with them and started seeing that I could be kind of a smart aleck and I could make people laugh. And so I was just, at an early age, learning the power of words and the power of language to amuse people, to anger people. So by the time I got into high school, it was pretty clear to me that I wanted to be some kind of a writer. And I started working on the high school newspaper and yearbook. And by the time I went into college, it was a very clear path for me. I was going to become a newspaper reporter. And I also had the dream of doing that as a day job and being a journalist, but writing a book someday.
Oh, you did, early on.
And early on, yeah. I would say by college, I definitely wanted to someday write a book.
Did you have an idea of what genre?
No, I really didn't. I just had this dream, though, that it'd be great to, I like to write. I loved reading. I'm a big fan of Steinbeck and Hemingway and the Fitzgerald and the American 20th century authors as a college kid, and I was thinking, like, God, if I could be another John Steinbeck. And so it's been a curious road for me to, all these years later, to have my journalism career and also have a best-selling book out.
Interesting, to live your dream.
Yeah, and for a while there, I wasn't sure if I was going to live it. I thought that life would be one of compromises because nothing happens overnight, and it's easy to start thinking that it won't happen at all, and that maybe this point of my life, this plateau, is where I'm meant to stay. And fortunately, I didn't just give in to that, and I kept going, and it took me where I wanted to be eventually.
What does it mean to keep going versus giving in?
I'm thinking more in terms of my career as a journalist. In journalism, unlike some other careers, to move up, you usually have to move on. So you start at smaller papers and you bump your way up to medium size and bigger mediums, and hopefully someday you get to a big metropolitan paper. And I'd done my bumping up, and I bumped my way to the Fort Lauderdale, Florida paper, which was a good metropolitan paper. It was fine. And that's when I got married and had children. And next thing you know, you have other things that are more important to you than your career. And many of my colleagues who were very talented were at that same point, and they said, well, I'm not going to keep moving my family around, so this is where I'm going to spend my career. And I wasn't happy. I wasn't content with that. I thought, I think there's something better I can do as a journalist. And I got an opportunity to come to Pennsylvania to become a magazine editor for Rodale Publishing.
Yeah, that was exciting.
And I became the editor-in-chief of Organic Gardening magazine, which was a huge departure for me because I was covering murders and crime and court cases. And now I was writing about organic gardening and the environment and things like that. But I loved it very much, and I was there for 4 years. And I was an editor, so I was also learning about management and dealing with personalities and things like that. And what I found I really missed was writing. And even though it was a great experience being a magazine editor, I missed writing. And I got an opportunity to become a columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is one of the great newspapers in this country, winner of 17 Pulitzer Prizes, and it's got a great storied tradition to it. And so that's where I ended up, and I was there until just a few months ago when I decided to take a break from journalism to work on books full time.
Do you think you'll go back to journalism?
I don't know. I mean, I love newspapers and I love writing nonfiction. Whether or not I'll go back to writing for newspapers, I'm not sure, but I'm certain that I'll continue to write first-person essays and journalistic commentary whether it's for newspapers or magazines or in books.
When you write as a columnist, how do you identify your audience? People say, who is your audience when you have a book? But do they say the same thing as a columnist? Who is your audience?
As a columnist, I always made the assumption that my audience was everyone, because I'm working for a mass circulation newspaper that goes out into an entire community of several million people once I was at bigger papers. And I didn't want to be at all exclusionary and think, well, certain people read and certain people don't. So my assumption was always that I was writing for everyone, and the more popular I got as a columnist, the more mail and email and phone calls I got, and that communication pretty much validated, confirmed it, that I was hearing from everyone from CEOs of companies and United States senators to housewives and soccer moms and garbage men and construction workers and people of all races and income levels. So it was a great job. It was just a great feeling of really having your pulse on the community that you were part of.
When you went to the Kiplinger mid-career program and you studied public policy, what were they teaching you?
Well, that was a program for mid-career journalists. We were all had 5 or 6 years at newspapers or television stations, and they only picked 10 people out of the country, so it was hard to get into. Yeah, it was a great feather in my cap and a great move for me. But they give you a lot of freedom to design your own program. I studied congressional politics in some detail because I was interested in the Congress, and I'd been covering national politics at my previous newspaper job. I also found that just that I had the freedom to pick classes, I started studying a lot of literary journalism. The writers who would write nonfiction journalism but would use the fiction writing techniques, including foreshadowing and metaphor and chronological building of storylines. And that's when it started dawning on me that my love of writing a book someday and my love of journalism didn't have to be two totally separate endeavors, that I could blend those together and use fiction writing techniques to write nonfiction, and which is pretty much my book Marley and Me, that came out of that tradition, where I was telling the true story of my family and my wife and I starting out in life, but I tried to write it like a novel. In fact, a lot of people will introduce me as, he wrote the novel, and I'll have to correct them. Well, it's not a novel, it's a memoir, it's a true story.
And what did you learn in Poynter, at the Poynter Institute for Media Studies?
The Poynter Institute was, that's a very well-regarded journalism think tank. And we spent a lot of time there thinking about what we do as journalists. And as a young journalist, you like to think that you're totally unbiased and objective. That's what we're trained to be. And at the Poynter Institute, we sat back and looked at it realistically, and every one of us, no matter how well-intentioned, we bring our own prism to life. A Jamaican journalist will cover an event different from a Polish journalist, different from a guy who went to Central Michigan University and grew up outside Pontiac, Michigan, like myself. And so it was just a nice period to reflect on what we do and to realize the human shortcomings that come with our job, so we could at least be aware of them as we went about our business of trying to objectively report the truth.
One of my hobbies is public policy, just as a civilian. And I find it extraordinarily challenging to find enough information to make a creditable, I don't even call it decision, but to develop a viewpoint. What's in the papers largely aren't framed well. They'll talk about Iraq, who died. I'm very up to date on who died, but nothing else really, or who the imams are, blah, blah, blah. I have no sense of what's going right or what's being constructed. Even here, 800 million, the budget's off in Michigan. No one ever talks what the total budget is. It's a discretionary budget. So one of the things that I personally think in journalism is that it's almost too narrow, because in the writing, they give you, if it bleeds, it leads. They give you the latest, but there's nowhere in the article. They'll give you the opposite point of view, fairness and this and that, but you can't really get much education from that. I try to read think tank stuff, left, right, whatever, but it takes a lot of effort. And the people who go to the internet for news, I don't know what happens. It's just, I don't know how to get context.
You're not quite sure what you're getting there.
I don't know how to get context.
Yeah, I agree with you that any one source is probably inadequate. I tend to think that if you read a selection of newspapers and magazines, and then also follow such as speeches or whatnot or congressional records, you start to get a picture. But there's a big investment of time to do that. You can't do it with everything, but if there's a topic that's important to you, I wouldn't just read it in my hometown paper, or even just in the New York Times, but I'd see what the Wall Street Journal said and what the Los Angeles Times said and what's in the Atlantic or in the New Yorker, and you start developing a knowledge out of confusion.
When you got the job at Organic Guardian, I was really surprised when I read that about you, because I thought they would require that you were planting radishes or that you had this interest or background, but clearly that was not significant, or
Well,
was it?
I did have that background, actually. What I didn't have was any kind of academic background or degree in horticulture or agronomy or anything. I had begun reading organic gardening shortly after I got married. I was always interested in the environment and leaving a small footprint on the earth. And organic gardening was just a natural extension of that philosophy. And so just as a homeowner and someone living in the world, I liked that. And I always liked to grow my own plants. And from a kid, I always had a little garden. And so I started practicing it and reading about it and becoming more and more interested. And I thought it was really good information in the magazine. But I remember as a journalist thinking like, but boy, are they amateur journalists? They're just not very good journalists.
Written.
They were all passionate about their subject. They weren't really professional. And when I applied for the job, the owners of the company had that exact same take. Like, well, we're staffed by a bunch of really passionate organic gardeners and farmers who aren't great journalists, and we need a professional journalist who can come in here and raise the level of our journalistic quality. And that was me. They picked me because I had strong journalism credentials, even though I didn't really have strong organic credentials. I was just someone I was just a reader, basically. And it was a happy marriage because I had a staff filled with people with a lot of expertise in the subject matter, and I brought expertise in journalism, and together I like to think we benefited each other and we improved the quality of the magazine quite a bit.
I would imagine your income stream is higher now than it was.
A little bit. Well, yeah, I mean, I was working as a columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer and decided I finally saw what the book that I'd been dreaming for years of writing a book someday. I finally realized it was about my own family and about this dog Marley, this big, crazy, bigger-than-life personality dog who my wife and I brought into our lives just as we were newlyweds starting out, which is that very impressionable time.
Yes.
We were trying to figure our lives out, what they would be, and this big nutty dog comes in and turns our lives upside down. So there was a natural tension, and there was also a natural story arc because we grew as people over the course of the dog's life. We went from being kids, just out of college, newly married, to being grown-ups, adults with children. And so that was I saw that as the book I wanted to write. But when I was writing it, I was really thinking that it was a small book. It was really more, I was writing it for myself and as a testimonial to my family and the love in our home. And I thought there'd be an audience, but I always pictured it as a small audience. And the book came out in October of 2005, and it immediately went on the New York Times bestseller list and quickly grew to the #1 position, and it was the #1 bestseller in America for 23 weeks. So half of 2006, it was the #1, and it stayed on the bestseller list for 75 weeks. It just went off a few weeks ago. So no one was more surprised than I was. I just didn't expect that kind of success from this little book about my life.
How has it changed your life?
Well, I'm doing things like this. I'm traveling.
Speaking.
I'm speaking and traveling around the country, and that's a good thing. I've been meeting a lot of very wonderful and interesting people. I try not to let it change the essence of our life. We have 3 kids, and the book is a celebration of a happy life.
Yes.
And people have mentioned
Constructive life.
people have mentioned that to me, that so many memoirs deal with dysfunction and
Yes.
the drug-addled, abusive relationships. And ours isn't that. Ours is just a story of a happy family with its ups and downs and its challenges and everything else. But I didn't want to change that life too dramatically. So despite the success of the book, we're still living in the same community. Our kids go to the same school. We hang out with the same friends.
Do you, when you get a setback, do you view it as a journalist, or are you in the moment of what's happening?
Any kind of a life setback?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, because as a person, I will curse it and I'll be angry or upset and I can't believe it. But as a writer, there's this little like silver lining. I think, this would be good this is material I can use. Things that go badly are much more interesting story matter than things that just go perfectly smoothly.
Why is that so?
Well, because there's drama there,
Oh.
and there's tension, and for instance, my book is filled with things that go badly as a dog owner. So I have this beautiful purebred dog, and every time I take him out, we get into some wild hijinks, a situation that ends in deep humiliation for me and embarrassment. As the dog owner, that's a cause for great, lots of hand-wringing and humiliation. But as a writer, that's the stuff of really funny and great story stuff. It's great material for writing. So whenever anything happens to me, if I'm a victim of crime or my car breaks down or anything, I always think like, well, this is a miserable day now, but this could be good material for something to be written down the road.
What I tell myself is someday I'm going to laugh about this.
Right.
I'm just not laughing now. you
Yeah, and
know?
that's basically what I say, but I say I'm going to laugh about this and I'm
And
going
write
to
it.
write it so other people will laugh about it too.
It's really, it's a trick, isn't it, to negotiate life and stay vertical.
It is, and it's especially been a trick in the wake of having a surprise best-selling book. It's a wonderful thing. Everyone says and knows it's a wonderful thing, but it is a double-edged sword. You have a lot more demands on your time. There's petty jealousy from colleagues occasionally, and hurtful things can be said, and life's just not as simple as it was before. So it's.
Do you find fame separates you a little bit from people that you're just meeting because they see whatever it is they see, or not?
Not really. I think I'm
No.
still very much the same guy I was. I don't really. I'm a guy who happens to have a book that took off,
Yeah.
which I think is different from being a famous person or a celebrity, and I don't see that. And most people just treat me like I'm who I am, and I like that.
It is a blessing.
I just like to have that kind of a comfortable relationship.
We want to thank John for being with us today. He's taught us some very important things in life. Principally, no matter what goes on, it can change your life. In his early years, he found out from the nuns and their requirement that he write about his misdeeds, that he could be quite funny and amusing. That in itself was a gift, because it gave him a vocation idea, which has actually been his vocation and his life. At the same time, he was quite lucky early on to have a sort of dream of having a dual career, writing in a journalistic format and also to do a book. And I particularly liked that the way he handles adversity is both experiential and as a writer. And I recommend this to you when things aren't going exactly your way. If you can see yourself as part of a storyline, I think you'll be quite ahead. The other thing that I admire about him is his feet are on the ground, and no matter what the changes, the demands on his time, he made sure that his circle of life was solid and stayed together. And I really also admire the preeminence in his value system on family life, good relationships, and having a bit of fun on the way through. I also liked it particularly that he followed his interest into the organic area, the organic farming area, which means in your own life you can sort of lateralize in ways you might not really expect by putting different aspects of your abilities with your interests. So thank you, and thank John, and for those who are around, he will be here and gone by the time you see this program, but we're lucky enough to hear him tonight at the Matrix Midland Festival. Thank you so very much for tuning in this time, and we'll see you next time. And remember, kindness counts. Please today go out and do something kind for someone you know and someone you don't know, and repeat it again tomorrow. And George, here's our dog, Teddy Bear. Would you care to show him? Anybody who's watching, this is a rescue dog. You too can do something nice for an animal who's been abused. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To contact Junia, send her an email at info@juniadoan.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadoan.com. Thanks for joining us. See you next time for Uncommon Sense with Junia Doan.